Hold on. Let's see. Are we live? Yes, we're live. Anyways, today we're going to be doing a stream on MGTOW and future technologies down the pipeline that are related to it and that will help influence the world to come. So, as you can see in this image, we are going to be talking about exactly that. And to start this off in general, I want to talk about the viewpoints and why we have the viewpoints that we have, at least I do, in terms of this kind of technology, as well as any other kind of technology related to basically putting the roles that are used to be done by women and that men still want to be with women with, and just giving it to technology so that it can do it for us instead. So, my position from 2019 onwards has always been in support of two key aspects. Schmeck's robots, I'm not sure if I should say okay, I'll just say it, sex robots and artificial wombs, but in particular the latter. And as a result, I have also supported surrogacy, IVF, and the like. And the reason for that is the fact that these technologies are the solution to our problems. These technologies are the way. Returning to traditionalism, returning to this 1950s idea of the nuclear family, I don't think that is the way. I also don't think taking women's rights away is the way forward, as much as some may advocate for it. I actually think this technology is the way forward. And Sandman backs me up on this. He has the same opinions as I do in terms of supporting this technology and viewing it as the way forward. Now, in regards to the 5 points that I want to mention in this live stream, point number 1, what future technologies are in the pipeline? So, while I would say the end goal is the artificial womb, we are obviously not there yet, and the way to get there is through many other innovations. So what we need to do is fulfill all of these other innovations and make sure they work before we get to the artificial womb. Now, the good thing is that much of the legwork is already done. With IVF, in vitro fertilization, we've already proven that we can create zygotes and embryos outside of the natural method of reproduction, and that said embryos are viable. With IVG, in vitro gametogenesis, we are going to be able to create the precursors for the embryo, that is, both the egg and sperm cells, by converting it from iPSCs and also blood cells, any kind of cells. So we will be able to create any kind of reproductive cell without ever needing any kind of donations and the like. So that is the benefit of in vitro gametogenesis. Now, also, in addition to that, we are also likely going to be having some kind of genetic engineering involved in this. And the reason I say that is that the artificial womb as a platform is obviously going to allow for such a thing. Because if you're going to be making the artificial womb, you might as well add genetic engineering capabilities. That way you can have some influence over the genes of the embryo, whether they are healthier or whether they have this or that genetic disease and how to remove it. So that is obviously part of the pipeline. Now, we already have surrogacy, which isn't perfect. By no means it's perfect. It's far from perfect, but at least it's still something. And in addition to that, we are able to implant embryos not created inside of the womb, which means you can have an embryo that's not genetically related to the host that's going to grow it. So that's how modern surrogacy works. However, with the artificial womb, we can do even better. With in vitro gametogenesis, we can do even better. We can basically create all of the cells we need, eggs and sperm, because remember, what applies for egg cells here also applies for sperm cells. And we will be able to do this without needing to have people donate eggs and sperm, which is good because it'll open up far more options. And instead of having to worry about, oh, whether or not you still have egg cells, as that hammer hand meme of no eggs suggests, we'll just be able to create them. So that's a good thing. Now, there is a video, I believe 7 years ago, of a demonstration of what appears to be almost like an artificial womb, where a goat embryo was grown in. And while these things are still glorified incubators, we are still able to demonstrate partial success. So we still have something. Now, we haven't yet perfected the technology of being able to grow an embryo from the very point of conception to the very end, which is basically an alive embryo, and a live baby, basically what I would call the finished product. But we are able to push the date where we can use this technology earlier and earlier into the life cycle of the embryo. So that is good, which means we can also push viability of the embryo further and further back, which is useful. So I believe that about covers it for my first point. We have sex robots, which will be useful for any men who want to have those kinds of relations, but not wanting to risk being with women, which is obviously a good thing. If you can avoid having to take that risk, you should, but that's not the main point. But you will also have artificial wombs and or genetic engineering, as well as all of the other technologies related to it, because the artificial womb as a platform is going to be a platform where you're going to be integrating many different technologies together into one product. Like you see in the photo. In this photo, not only do you have, keep in mind, it's a concept art, not only do you have the thing that actually grows the embryos, you also have monitors, things like that, status information, something like that. So obviously we're going to be having software that will help manage this technology. And not only that, if we can create perfect conditions, we can create conditions for the embryo that are going to be even better than ones that exist naturally. So that is a huge benefit. And that is something I look forward to. Now, with that out of the way, I want to mention the second point, which is why these technologies are talked about in MGTOW, why it's beneficial, and how it helps us. So, when it comes to MGTOW and or feminism and the society we live in, we have to remember that we can consider women to have some degree of advantage, if not a significant degree of advantage over us men. However, there are two ways we can go about this. We can either choose the traditional path, which is basically going back to what existed before feminism, or we can push forward. Now, I'm of the opinion that going back to traditionalism is not the way. The reason for it is if traditionalism already failed and resulted in feminism, why should we go back considering it can just as easily fail again? So there's that. If traditionalism worked as an idea, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So if we're in this stage where we're contemplating this, then it's obviously not the way. So that leaves us with the second option, which is pursuing this technological-based future and technological accelerationism, which is what you see in this photo here. So the reason why it would help us men, and the reason why it would help MGTOW in particular, is that when it comes to us men, we will be able to effectively, on a massive enough scale, decouple from women. What I mean by that is that women will be able to basically, let's say 100% of women choose not to have children for XYZ reason. With such a technology, we sidestep the risks that such a thing would pose, And thus, we have more leverage because instead of having to basically agree to whatever terms they would give us, we can just bypass the need for them on a societal level by simply having the technology do everything for us. So that's a good thing. Basically, if we want to be able to continue society, which I assume, despite how much society has been against us, and the reason for that is the gynocentrism, we'll still be able to continue thanks to this technology. In addition to it, the reason why I believe it would help MGTOW in specific is that because it creates a way to continue the species onwards without the need for relationships, without the need for marriage and these kinds of things, it helps us because this would mean that there would be more compelling reasons to live a MGTOW lifestyle and more reasons taken away from those who promote marriage and or relationships. Thus, they will not be able to sell marriage effectively, not be able to sell relationships effectively, and thus have to give up on said ambitions. So that's my viewpoint on this issue. If they're not able to sell relationships and or marriage, if there's no need for it, then the natural course, the path of least resistance, is going to turn out to be MGTOW, which means that, in essence, you've basically defeated gynocentrism because even if you have laws that benefit women, even if you have women's suffrage and like women voting, which, to be fair, I'm not exactly against, provided that they have skin in the game, which means they get drafted. It is going to improve things considerably because even if you have, let's say, continued feminism, which I do believe it's going to happen, we're still going to prosper because MGTOW is going to be the default, which is the main aim of MGTOW. If we can pass MGTOW down from generation to generation, we're going to have MGTOW be a permanent force instead of a temporary strike on marriage. Beneficial. Now, I would like to mention point number 3, which is how exactly would these technologies help build a more MGTOW-focused world, or the MGTOW world as I call it, and what Sandman describes. So, I believe I mentioned this already, but I'm going to mention it more in this specific thing. The reason we haven't had mass mainstream capture yet, even though we're on that path already in terms of men and the MGTOW philosophy, is because despite the fact that we're able to succeed in terms of content and the like, we are still not able to pass it down from generation to generation, which is what we need to be able to do. If we're able to do this, MGTOW continues. We aren't replaced by Sims in 80 years. So, I do believe that this technology would help us. And part of the reason I believe that is that I also happen to believe that most MGTOWs would be inclined to have a preference for sons over daughters. Now, how ethical that preference is completely up to your interpretation. You can choose to believe that choosing gender is not ethical or that choosing gender is ethical. Personally, I'm on the side of parents' choice. But I believe that such a technology and the underlying preference that I believe exists would allow for more men to exist in the world, which means that MGTOW itself grows stronger. The more men there are in the world in general, and the more of those men are MGTOW leaning, the more likely you're going to have a society that caters to that, and that caters to such a voting bloc, and it's inevitably going to be a voting bloc given that everyone is going to reach age 18 at some point and above, which means entering the workforce, entering the voting age. I digress. But anyways, The reason why it's beneficial is that when such a demographic group en masse becomes a voting bloc, they cannot no longer be ignored. The reason why MGTOW tends to be ignored in terms of politics and the like is that it's still viewed as niche, and that it, as a demographic group, despite being a microcosm of all men at large, of those that are single, is still viewed as somewhat niche. Like, I'm not sure if Naruki5 said it correctly or if I've remembered correctly, but he said that we're on track to achieve 1% of all men in North America being MGTOW. That's quite a lot of people, but I feel like we can do way better than that. I don't know, maybe 10% or 15% or even 30%. Now that would be golden. And now, if you have such a demographic group that is created with this technology, you will have that 30% or 40%, or at the very minimum, at least 20% of all men being MGTOW, if not more. Because keep in mind, we're still dealing with the reality that most of Gen Z will be single. Most Gen Z men will be single, which of course leads to this idea of being MGTOW by default. So if you have a world where a good chunk of your voting bloc in terms of men, and they are a significant voting bloc, is MGTOW adjacent, and that block of people, that demographic group is self-sustaining, then they cannot be ignored, and eventually MGTOW will start to win over. The plantation will basically disappear. Hello, Mark Freeman. You're here. Welcome to this live stream, and as I've mentioned, we're talking about. I'm not sure if I have, but I heard it's basically a book where it's sort of like a patriarchy, but it's different than a standard patriarchy, if I can say it that way. Anyways, Mark Freeman, the topic of this video, of this live stream, is going to be MGTOW and future technologies that are in the pipeline. And what I mean by that is the technologies. Yeah, that's what I mean. But instead of doing that, what we MGTOWs are going to do, and what I believe we should do, is promote these technologies. That is what Sandman does and others do, and that is what I would also do, as I have done since 2019. Anyways, the topic is MGTOW and these technologies and why it benefits us, and what we should do to get there, as well as a progress report on how far we are from getting there. And in terms of the progress report, in 2019, I made a prediction that we're like 10 years away from the artificial womb. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit that my prediction would be wrong and that it would take longer. However, what I do believe is that it will happen eventually, and that it would happen in my lifetime. Maybe not the lifetime of most MGTOWs, given that they're older, but I believe the artificial womb will happen at least in my lifetime. I also agree that this would be a good idea. Any investment on our part that has to do with this kind of technology would benefit us in the end. I'm of the opinion that in terms of how much we pursue this technology, that the ends justify the means. It is the right thing to focus on this technology as a priority for us, despite what some in MGTOW say. And we need to be willing to admit this, and I'm going to admit this. There is a cohort of MGTOWs that believe that artificial wombs are a mistake and should not be pursued. They tend to believe that having children itself is a violation of the MGTOW tenets, which I personally disagree with, based on how that is done. But they believe it's a mistake and that it's going to be used by the government instead of benefiting us men. Now, I don't believe in that position because I believe technology is inevitably always going to trickle down. For example, with the internet, in the early days, the very early days, it was a DARPA project, a project of the government kept within government offices and the like. But now everyone and their mother has access to the internet, and the internet is a truly global thing. So if that's what happened to the internet, and if AI is going to be expanding everywhere instead of being kept secret, then it's obvious the same is going to happen to artificial wombs, as has any technology happened beforehand. Sorry for that sound, but Mark Freeman, if you're saying this, I need to tell you that governments are already trying to do this. They are already providing tax incentives for having kids. Like, this is old news. No disrespect, but this is old news. This is already happening. Modern Gnostic. They will allow AI and robots to manage it just like the Matrix. I do believe that there's going to be some kind of integration with AI in this because if you have agentic models, large language models, reasoning models, you're probably going to integrate some of that in this technology so that it can act semi-autonomously. I do believe that this technology is going to have a computer attached to it of some kind, which, like most computers, you can use, but also has some levels of automation. For example, you're going to have an operating system. The artificial womb is going to need a processor, a graphics processor, RAM, storage, and the like. Probably even networking, if you want to go that far. But it's going to have some or all of these components attached to it because, as in the name, the artificial womb, it's obviously artificial. And the way to control it is through some kind of computer attached to it. So that's my opinion. You're obviously going to see these things attached to the technology, and thus artificial wombs are going to have displays, CPUs, GPUs, RAM, NAND flash storage of some kind, and Ethernet or Wi-Fi. At least that is my prediction. That is what I'm willing to bet on. I could be wrong though, but that is what I'm willing to bet on. Feel free to elaborate on your viewpoint if you disagree with me. I also want to mention, as part of the point I'm doing, as part of this live stream, why such technology is worth considering despite the risks. These technologies do indeed have risks, because with this technology, with these ideas, we are going to go into uncharted territory, because until such a point, there has never been a point in human history where there has been a way to reproduce, where one gender can reproduce entirely on its own. Given Russia and Ukraine, I do believe such a thing is a reasonable assessment, but I hold out hope that it won't happen before it. But progress on the artificial womb can be lightning fast if we get there. But it's a bit slow, I'm going to admit it, but we're still getting there. We got there with IVF. We're going to be able to produce egg cells and sperm cells on our own. We are already having incubators, and we are already making these kind of souped up incubators, which is basically this demonstration of an artificial womb growing a goat embryo. So we're already partially there. We just need to finish what we started. That is exactly the reason why governments might consider such a thing. I'm going to say one thing. I believe, and I have reason to, that this kind of technology is going to be a race. If the West blocks such a technology, China is going to build it, and vice versa. Because keep in mind, China and America are already competing against each other in terms of AI and other technologies. Chinese semiconductor manufacturers are already able to start making computer chips and microchips of decent quality. Like Xiaomi, no, not Xiaomi, like Huawei was sanctioned, so it couldn't be able to produce good microcontrollers and microchips chips and microprocessors, but it had its own fabs, semiconductor fabs, and it was able to catch up with Western semiconductors in a relatively quick amount of time for their standards. Now, Western semiconductor technology, especially the Taiwanese one, is improving, but there is no denying that there is effort on the Chinese mainland, at least in the People's Republic of China, to have their own semiconductor technologies and being able to produce them, which is why you have GPUs like Morthreads, companies like Morthreads producing GPUs, and companies like Xiaoxin producing x86 64 compatible CPUs. So it's going to be a race and a competition to see who gets this technology first. And once that happens, the cat is going to be out of the bag because more countries are going to want such a thing to stave off population collapse. Indeed, such technology is probably the only way you can stave off such a thing. So, modern Gnostic, you are right on this count. Anyways, why it's worth considering despite the risks? I'm going to say that there are risks with this. Such a technology, given that you are basically going to be in uncharted territories in terms of human interaction and being able to reproduce entirely on your own, as well as the risks of whether this technology will result in birth defects, other kinds of defects, as well as who will get to control it, whether it will be just for the wealthy or for all of us, and the like. So there are risks, but I believe despite these risks, it is still worth pursuing. It is still worth it. The potential for MGTOW to be permanent and for men to be completely decoupled from women, even in this aspect, is too important not to pursue it. Because if we don't pursue it, and we hope that, oh, the laws will change and that the plantation will get marginally better, sure, it might happen, and many MGTOWs might be tempted to get married again if things are slightly better, but it's not going to change anything meaningfully because gynocentrism would still exist. This, however, has the potential of making gynocentrism a thing of the past by introducing true gender equality, by putting men and women on an equal footing, and by making men and women independent of each other, such that any interaction between the two is completely voluntary. As in, nobody of one group is forced to interact with the other group for the purposes of needs like reproduction and other stuff, or any kind of needs, and the only kind of interactions that happen are going to be completely voluntary. And we should want such a thing. We should want a world where interactions between men and women are voluntary, where you are not reliant on one and the other, where society can continue regardless of what one gender does. Something like that. So that is what I'm considering. Also, it has the potential to benefit all sorts of groups of people, not just us MGTOWs. In particular, one of the big beneficiaries in this technology that I see and that people should pay close attention to is women themselves. So women as a demographic group, in terms of using the monopoly on reproduction, to use those terms as bargaining power in society, they have an incentive to not go through with this technology, but they would also be the beneficiaries of such a technology, because if you can basically get the machine to grow the baby for you instead of you having to do it yourself, if you're a woman or any person with a uterus, because there are groups of people that have such things but would not consider themselves women. If you're like in that category of person, you would avoid all of the problems that basically growing an embryo would deal to you, including pain. And not having to deal with pain and offloading and offshoring said process to technology, such that technology does it instead, is going to be the path of least resistance. Like, it's obvious. I think even for women, using this technology is going to be inevitably a path of least resistance. So they would be inclined to support it, and so would we, because everyone of every group of people, including us MGTOWs, stand to gain from this. So that is my understanding of it. We will be able to have a world where it is not gynocentric or tilted to favor one group of people over the other. We will have MGTOW that basically lasts forever because no Sims will replace us. We will be able to have a world where our way of life is common and normal instead of it being niche. And we stand to benefit from this. But so would women, because women wouldn't have to go through any kind of pain of pregnancy. They would also stand to benefit because they would be able to offload everything to technology, meaning that they wouldn't need to participate in the process themselves. And groups of people that would normally not have access to reproductive technologies would also benefit from this, because this makes the process of reproduction and of continuing your own legacy, to put it in simple terms, more accessible to everyone. Like, you do not need to have a relationship to be able to do it. You do not have to have a committed relationship. You do not have to have a marriage. You can still be single, and you do not even have to have a surrogacy contract or something to do this. Like, in the modern day, despite being able to avoid things like marriage and relationships, you still need to have a contract of some kind to pursue surrogacy, and it would cost a lot. But I'm betting that we could push costs down with this technology, because if you have machines do it, you obviously don't need to pay someone to grow a fetus for you. And moreover, the cost would simply be in terms of maintaining the actual machines as they are used. And perhaps we might even have different generations of these machines. Like, for example, the Apple iPad or the Apple iPhone, it went through so many iterations. The iPhone went from the iPhone 2G, which is a very old phone with little capabilities. Base storage was like 8 gigabytes or something. Now you have 2 terabyte iPhones in terms of storage, with like 8 gigabytes of RAM or something, state-of-the-art processors, better cameras, better displays, better everything, and with less bezels. And so with the iPad. The iPad originally began as a clone of the iPhone. And look where iPad is right now. iPad has its own windowing system. iPad has a lot of storage. On iPads, you can even run virtual machines through UTMSC and also on iPhones. That wasn't possible for a long while. And you're able to do a lot of productive work on iPad that you wouldn't have been able to do on like the first and second generations, and even the third generations of iPads. So things are obviously getting better in that regard. So the artificial womb is going to be exactly like that. The first iteration might not be the best, might be basic, but the iteration that builds upon that and the iteration that builds upon that is obviously going to continue, and things are going to improve. For example, the first generation Vision Pro. It's a remarkable product, but it's not exactly the best. But Vision Pros that come after it, and Vision Pros that come after the second Vision Pro, are obviously going to keep improving as things get refined and as all of the bugs are worked out. So that's what I think would happen with the artificial womb. It's worth considering, because even if the first iterations result in problems, even if it results in birth defects, they will be solved by the second, third, fourth, and even fifth iteration. And we'll be able to work it out in such a way where we might make conditions that are even better than the natural womb, and we're going to have full control over the entire process, as well as see exactly what's going to happen, instead of relying on and hoping that the natural method does its job. So instead of hoping that the natural method, the pregnancy and all of that would do its job and that things would not miscarry, we would have greater degree of control, and we would be able to see in real time if something wrong is going on. For example, in this concept art, these windows are glass. We are able to see what's going on. So obviously, if such a real thing happened, we would also be able to see this in real time and see how it works, see if there's a problem. And we could have software that would alert us if there's a problem and what needs to be solved. Imagine if these artificial wombs were like nodes, and you have like a master control server controlling like 50 of these nodes, artificial womb nodes. The server could sense, oh, there's a problem in node 45 or something, and then alert the system administrator or whoever's in charge of this if this is in like a factory or something. And artificial womb factories where embryos are produced could obviously also exist. These system administrators could also respond, fix the problem in like node 45, which is like one of these that you see on the screen, and they're going to be able to improve things. Like, instead of hoping and praying that things work, you can actually ensure and trust that they are going to work. So, now that point 4 has been discussed, I want to discuss point 5. How we should go about pushing said ideas and what strategy we can employ in our favor. And that's actually where I want to switch images. So I'm going to switch image, and I'm going to share an image file that discusses a strategy as my friend described it. Now, one of my friends, and this is in the wake of some of the anti-artificial womb MGTOWs having problems with the technology, making comments about it, he said this: the idea is this. Sell this particular idea to girl boss feminists and gay men about how this will empower the right to reproduction. Then we get that right as well. What's so difficult to understand about that? I believe that this is the strategy. This is the way we should do things. Now, in my initial idea, I had the concept of MGTOW, the MGTOW community, working with the LGBTQ+ community so that their community fights off the tradcons, we help them, and then we can work on this technology together. But one of the anti-artificial womb MGTOWs, Cyber Totson in particular, actually said something that enlightened me and also gave birth to my friend discussing this idea. So what Cyber Totson said was that for a long while, there was a pro-artificial womb position within feminism, and that there was a demand for motherhood to be in test tubes and something like that, as well as basically IVF, surrogacy, and all of that, as well as the artificial womb, and basically offloading all of the process that you would need in a pregnancy to that. So Cyber Totson mentioned this, and this gave me an idea. What if we not only sided with the LGBTQ+ community in terms of helping with maintain surrogacy and IVF for our own benefits, and also seeking to make this artificial womb, but we also somehow managed to disarm any opposition coming from feminism and women to this technology by making them like this technology and want to implement it. So that's the idea. We can disarm opposition from women who would have the most incentive to oppose this technology by selling this technology to them and explaining to them why this technology helps them in particular. If, for example, in terms of the artificial womb, surrogacy, and IVF and IVG and all this particular, but especially the artificial womb. If you can make the argument for artificial womb rooted in gay, bisexual, pansexual, and whatever type of men, being able to reproduce without having to be in a heterosexual relationship, then they're obviously going to be interested in that idea, at least these kinds of people, and society is going to be more accepting of this than it is going to be of simply pushing this as a group, as a thing that would benefit men primarily. So if you can sell it to LGBTQ plus people, as well as sell it to women, and if you can frame the narrative about this technology as being one that helps them in particular, especially the feminists, if you can make the feminists think that they benefit the most from this technology, opposition will be disarmed from their side. And thus the only people who will be opposing this are the tradcons. And in terms of society and everything, we will be able to make quick work of tradcons. But we need to be able to have other communities in addition to this one, this MGTOW community, our own, side with this technology. If we can get this to happen, we are in a golden position. And the way we should do that is whenever there's something that happens related to surrogacy that would affect them, we should side with them, because something that affects them in relation to surrogacy, as surrogacy is the precursor to artificial womb, is obviously going to affect us down the road. So we should offer as much as assistance and support as it would make sense for us to offer in terms of MGTOW, and also in the meantime sell this idea to feminists so that we can preemptively disarm opposition before it even has a chance to materialize. If we can do that, we win and we get what we want. That's basically what my friend says, and I 100% agree with him based on that point. So I would like to thank Cybertotson for mentioning this other point about feminists, because my friend got his idea from that, and I managed to make the strategy that I already have, which I consider good, even better, because not only can we get a group that would want this technology as much as we do, we can also get the group that would oppose it to completely disarm their opposition and actually side with us. In that case, we win because there's going to be no significant, meaningful opposition to it. So the path to the MGTOW world, as I describe it, is inevitable, but it has to happen in this particular way. Now, the problem with that idea is that some MGTOWs don't see the bigger picture. They believe, and I'm not going to name names, I'm just going to say it bluntly, they would rather not have this happen. They would rather lose if it means being able to exercise their own prejudice against people they don't like, especially LGBTQ plus people. That's at least some of them. And as much as you can try to understand why they have this kind of opinion, they are not acting as team players in this instance. We will not get what we all want, and a significant amount of us do. Those that watch Sandman, we obviously want this technology. It would benefit us, but we're not going to get it if we have people that will sabotage it, sabotage efforts to get there, and who are not acting like team players. So what needs to happen is that we need to have actual team players, and we need to have a common strategy. I believe that this is the strategy. This is what we should do if we want this technology to happen. Now, can we do such a strategy? I believe we can, but the onus is on having excellent public relations and in being able to pursue this course of action so that we win. We must be able to negotiate with others. We must be able to have good foreign relations. We must be able to understand where other communities are coming from in this idea and how to appeal to them so that we can make this happen. We want this. We can get this. but we need to do constructive actions that will lead us to this future. This is not actually, I'm just going to respond to this. You're currently on a MGTOW channel, and the thing we're discussing is how we're going to get this technology. And this technology, regardless of my viewpoints on MGTOW, is something I'm still going to support, because this technology is good and it's based. And whether or not I have MGTOW attached to my name, I'm still going to support it. None of this technology is weird. I'm single. I'm not in a long-term relationship. Age has nothing to do with MGTOW. That's not how any of this works. In my opinion, and I'm going to be honest, even a 5-year-old can be MGTOW if they're male and understand the philosophy. Now, that's just my opinion, but I believe that age is not a factor. But since we're on the tail end, we have had the age argument discussed in 2018, 2019, 2020 or something. And the obvious conclusion was, at the time, as is now, is that age is not a factor in being MGTOW. And in particular, you do not need to have already been in a relationship, to have already been a boomer or 50 years old to understand the MGTOW philosophy and choose to be MGTOW. If you're able to participate in following this philosophy without ever having been in a relationship in the first place, then it's obviously a good thing to do so, because you would do so without ever having been in a bad situation, which is divorce and family court, having to deal with alimony and child support and the like, as well as any kind of false accusations. If you can avoid it, then it's obviously good. And between you and me, we both know that I would still choose to be single, even if I weren't going to call myself MGTOW, because being single by itself appeals to me. But since these comments are not related to the topic at hand, I would want to finish the stream so I can discuss the topic. The MGTOW videos, in particular from Yorkshire MGTOW, explain all of this perfectly well. You should watch one of his videos on marriage, Yorkshire MGTOW marriage. He discusses everything that needs to be known. But anyways, I'm going to start wrapping the stream up, because I've already discussed most, if not. MGTOW has nothing to do with being incel. You've got to be joking. The people that choose to avoid relationships cannot be conflated with people who are not able to be in a relationship, because if you make a choice, and that choice is to go your own way, even if you didn't have relationship success, you still had to make a choice. Ergo, you're MGTOW. Thought this was basic logic. But as I digress, to continue on, so I can actually end this, we can have this. We can make this happen if we put our mind to it. If we do all of the right moves in terms of having outreach, in terms of communicating with our communities, hearing out their concerns, as well as working with them. The problem is, some MGTOWs are just not going to do that, and they would sabotage this. So we need to take that into account as well. But this is within reach. This is within reach. We can do this, and obviously we should. So that's my opinion on strategy. And to end this off, as I've already mentioned, at this point in the stream, all 5 of my points that I was going to mention, I'm going to mention that regardless of MGTOW, regardless of men going their own way and MGTOW viewpoint, this technology is worth achieving. And regardless of if you're a MGTOW or a feminist or something else entirely, we should all work together because this technology would benefit all of us, regardless of gender, regardless of characteristics, regardless of sexual or romantic orientation, regardless of any of these characteristics. We all seek to benefit from this. So, and ironically, one thing I'm going to mention, the people that don't care about this are the incels because they spend too much time thinking about, oh no, why don't I get laid or something, instead of actually trying to build the future. We are here to build the future. We are not here to listen to complaints about being rejected by women. We do not care if people are rejected by women because MGTOW is not about complaining about such things. And in my opinion, I believe the incels are ungrateful because they've been given being single on a silver platter and they refuse and complain about being single. In a reasonable world, all of the people that call themselves incels now, they would be 100% MGTOW. Like, they would just accept that they aren't desired and actually choose to do something with their lives with their single status. Because life as a single man is desirable, is appealing, but they have to understand it. I'm just going to disagree with, because the very fact that you're MGTOW or calling yourself men going their own way means you've had to make some kind of choice. You cannot ignore the choice element because MGTOW hasn't been coerced or anything. You still must make a choice if you want to remain single and choose to not pursue relationships or women at all. Then again, in my particular case, I'm not really that into women anyway, so I don't really care, but others might, but this logic applies universally. Also, it's not an incel philosophy since incels believe in looks maxing, status maxing, bullshit maxing, whatever. We don't. We believe in being single. So, as I don't want my stream to be derailed, I think I will basically end it right here. So basically, this technology is worth pursuing. We should do it, and we should still do it regardless of what those in MGTOW who oppose to it have to say about it, because it will lead to us having a society that is more fair, more equitable, leads to true gender equality, and leads to a better life overall. We have the opportunity to make a technology that would allow all interactions between men and women on a collective level to be voluntary. So we should do this. And it is my hope that we are going to have this technology happen at one point or the other. So what I would say is we should still do it, and I hope that this happens in my lifetime, and I'm confident that it will happen in my lifetime. So that's basically my perspective on these technologies, how this is going to work. Next stream is probably going to be an open panel or something where I discuss things in general, but I wanted to get this out of the way. And I would like to say bye-bye for now. But before I say that, keep in mind this panel is going to be open to absolutely everyone next stream, and I'll probably have a debate with someone else after that, but that's my streaming schedule. No longer that. There was a time where I was that, but it just doesn't work that way. But anyways, goodbye, and if you want to keep rambling that MGTOW are incels in denial, you can do it somewhere else. Goodbye, stream is over.